Little girl went to her daddy once and said, "Daddy, are you afraid of cows?" "No." "Are you afraid of snakes?" "No." "Are you afraid of long woolly worms?" "No." "Daddy, you aren't afraid of anything but Mom, are you?"
Travel along, Catholic pilgrims, for 1 year as we learn from Venerable Fulton Sheen, one of the greatest Catholic teachers in modern times. Join me, Amy Thomas, once a week for a short reading out of Bishop Sheen's book, Way to Inner Peace. Hey, Catholic pilgrims, welcome to week 30. This week's readings might be my favorite so far, and the reason is because it reminds me so much of the importance of confession. The topic that we're talking about is called entering into oneself. And I have written about this topic in my own way many, many times. And it's just so important because it really is about looking at ourselves, looking into a mirror, being aware of who we really are, what we've really done, and how we do really need to grow and change in areas where we may have been neglecting or lacking or just completely abandoned in our lives. And so I absolutely love this week's readings, and I think you're going to like them too. So the 3 key points that we're going to be looking for are motives, moral awakening, and mirrors. Number 30. Entering into oneself. Most of us know our neighbors better than we know ourselves. We can tell all their faults, enumerate all the scandals about them, and even add a few for good measure. But we are hardly conscious of any single fault of our own. And yet, the human being is the only creature in the universe who has the power of being able to look at himself in a mirror, to turn back on himself, judge his motives, see his faults and his good deeds, and thus either be pleased or angry with himself in the light of his conscience. Most of us do not like to look inside ourselves for the same reason we do not like to open a letter that has bad news. Some try to get away from conscience by eliminating consciousness through alcoholism and drugs. Others use the dubious technique of calling things by their wrong names. For example, calling darkness light, bitter, sweet, and sweet, bitter. Thus they seek to escape the eternal distinction of right and wrong. Speak of evil in its true terms, and you rob it of half of its seductiveness. Sex is less appealing when called lust. Providing for the future becomes vicious when labeled avarice. And asserting self loses its glamour when called egotism. The great Greek historian Lecky said that the surest sign of utter degradation is when men speak of virtues as if they were vices, and of vices as if they were virtues. They altered, he says, the customary meaning of words in reference to actions. Men looked on deeds of infamy and were not shocked. The sin of the world and its moral corruption infected the air. Men were naked and not ashamed, not because they were innocent, but because no sense of guilt assailed them. In our days, when some politicians prostitute public office or else ally themselves with evil forces, they justify their wickedness on the ground that, quote, they did nothing against the law, unquote. The only law for them becomes civil law and their individual interpretation of it. Never do they think of the moral law in their conscience or the 10 Commandments. Even men who in their own personal lives are moral will nevertheless condone and even approve anything their party does, even when manifestly dishonest or immoral. It is for such subservience to the trivialities of petty parties that the number of true patriots in public office steadily declines, leaving the real patriots to the battlefields. This paralysis of conscience reaches its final stage in the mind when, as pure water becomes loathsome to the drunkard, so does justice and virtue to the depraved conscience. Then comes that mentality spoken of by the Roman satirist: virtutum vendeant in tabiscantque relecta. Let them see virtue and pine for it, for now it is beyond their reach. No condition of the mind is worse than to forget the heavens from which we fall, for then we lose all aspirations for conversion. This condition of a moral awakening is the same for all men as it was for the prodigal son who entered into himself. Most people do not consider the state of their conscience until they are driven inside by the collapse of everything on the outside. As poverty, famine, and disillusionment made the prodigal come to himself, so it may be that some great catastrophe may be a necessary curtain raiser to his spiritual regeneration. The earliest summons of a conscience is generally met with rebellion and resistance. Those who hate religion do so because of the evil in their life. When conscience begins to awaken, it exasperates into a more vicious rebellion. We become moral Lacoquians, stung into a living martyrdom with the sting of the serpents of our guilt, which lie in the bosom of our conscience. When remorse scourges us, the old ego becomes mad and even more violent than ever before. Temper flares, hatred of others multiplies as a projection of a disguised hatred of self, and a despondency seizes the soul from which no distraction gives relief. But all these violent outbursts against virtue are really nothing but the gathering of dark and angry clouds which one day will be dissolved in showers. Those who have to counsel other people should therefore never take too seriously the seeming wrath against goodness and morality. It may be only the swathing grave cloths out of which the new person is to rise. The individual really does not hate goodness, but himself. But in his pride, he will not admit it until at last restlessness and uneasiness drive him to his knees for pardon and for light. When he begins to blame himself and not economic conditions or his companions or his grandmother or his ductless glands, he finds the key to happiness. There was more than fable in the old mythology which told of Pandora's box, a veritable receptacle of ills made tolerable only because there was hope at the bottom. Modern man is not coming to God from the goodness in the world. He is coming to God from the evil in his own heart. I feel like I could do weeks worth of podcasts just on this reading. Like I said, it's my favorite one so far, just because I think it is one of the most important ones that we've read so far, and it shows us just how important the sacrament of confession is. So to get started, I want everybody to think of that one person in your life. I know there's one, either they've been in your past or they're in your present, that is described here by Bishop Sheen. Completely and utterly unable to look at themselves. And in fact, you may even be like the person in the beginning. You may know all their faults and you may know what they need to work on. All of those things. I want you to think of that person. And I don't want you to think about them because I want to think ill of them. But I just want us to take this moment, because it is easier for us to think about others who kind of fit this bill. I want us to take a moment to see how they really do fight against goodness. It seems almost as if they cannot stand things going well in their life. They have an inability to enjoy any happiness. They push everyone away, and then they blame everybody else. And just think about how lonely and sad this person is. When I was counseling, this was what we're talking about here, the biggest hurdle to me ever helping people. People would come and sit on my couch, and yes, all of them had been victims of something, either domestic or sexual violence. In the first several sessions that we would have, I would just let them spew their guts. Let them tell me about the abuse. I will sit here and I will listen to you just get this out of you and just lay it out on the floor. And nobody really had a problem doing that. I had a few who were hesitant just because it was so painful for them and they'd kept it bottled up for so long. But most people were glad that they had a listening ear in front of them that wasn't, a sensitive or a connected relationship. It didn't bother me any to hear their story. I wasn't a family member or a friend or something like that would really be affected by it. So just spew it out. And they did. But then the next couple of sessions, I would want to say, okay, let's look at where your life is right now. Because a lot of the people that would come to me, the abuse had happened in the past and they were just now starting to work on it. And I was like, okay, we've done this good work. And sometimes they needed to get it out more than just once, and that's fine. We've done this good work. Let's take stock of your life right now, because we cannot go back and change the past. So let's start to look at things now. And are you safe? Are you away from the abuse? All those things. We always tried to take care of all those things. Yes. And this is where I lost so many people, because they could not face themselves. They could not face themselves. And oftentimes when people have been abused or gone through something very tragic, they have ways of coping that are not healthy. And a big reason why is because the unhealthy coping skills are quick and easy and get the job done fast, though they are detrimental to our lives. Thinking about alcoholism and drugs and all those different things that even Bishop Sheen talked about. And so people gravitate towards those things, but they can't face the fact that that's what they gravitated towards. And it is understandable, because those things are, like I said, quick and easy. But then also, a lot of times people lash out at other people and project their anger and their pain on other people, and they've hurt relationships, or they just sink themselves in different ways. And again, I'm not blaming them. It's all understandable, because we aren't taught very well how to cope with tragedies, sadly. And so this is where I would lose most people. And they could not face what they had become. But the only way to ever get better is to face that mirror. The other day my husband was telling me something, and he said he had read that what they're actually finding out about soldiers who have PTSD. And in no way am I laying blame on soldiers. I am a military wife. I'm extremely patriotic. But it is something that we need to talk about, because we can't help people if we don't speak the truth. Anyway, what they're finding is that, soldiers who come back with PTSD, it's not so much what they saw that causes the problems. Oftentimes what causes the problems is because of what they have done. People don't realize that they have that capacity within them to do some things that, are not pleasant. And a lot of us don't think we would ever do certain things, and then we get into war or dangerous situations, or, just I can't think of anything else, but just war, basically, or a tragedy of some kind. We don't know how we will respond when everything is calm and peaceful. And so when we get into those situations and we find ourselves with the capability of doing things we didn't think we were capable of in a very negative way, people really struggle with that. They really struggle with that because they didn't think they would do those things. And that's what's so hard on, our military members is when they do go and fight in battle, we are asking them to do some pretty awful things that are hard for them to do. And then they come home and, we just, pat them on the back and have a parade or whatever. And we don't understand that there is a war going on within them. And yes, sometimes you definitely have PTSD over what you saw and what you went through. We also need to recognize that sometimes people struggle with what they've done. And we need to be understanding of that, because it would be hard. But we often don't confront ourselves. And this is something that as human beings we have to understand. We do have the capacity for evil within us. Every single one of us. We do have that capacity. If we ever get to the point where we think, nah, it's everybody else, it's not me, we are in deep danger. And so I just want to read here what Bishop Sheen says. He says, "And yet the human being is the only creature in the universe who has the power of being able to look at himself in a mirror, to turn back on himself, judge his motives, see his faults and his good deeds, and thus either be pleased or angry with himself in the light of his conscience." And like I said, we have to recognize that we all have the capacity for evil. We all have the capacity for goodness as well. But if we are unwilling to look in the mirror, we will never see ourselves for what we truly are and what we've truly allowed ourselves to be. And then we can never, ever change. I would get judges that would ask for my opinion on whether people who had been convicted of sexual abuse of children should ever be let out of prison. And my answer was no. My answer is no. And this is why. I have never seen a repentant sexual offender. Never. A child molester. I've never seen one. I have never seen them genuinely confront the mirror and see themselves and just be devastated by what they see and be brought down low like the prodigal son. I have seen them, say, oh, yes, that was terrible and that was bad. But I'm talking about down in the bottom of the well and seeing what they have done and fully getting it. Because if they did, they would feel like they were almost going to die. And I've never seen that because they are unwilling to face the evil that they have done. We, as humans, we do a fantastic job of putting up all kinds of defensive barriers around us in order to shield ourselves from the reality of what we have become. And this is what keeps us from, ever truly growing and changing. And if we do confront the mirror and we do let down those barriers and we do face ourselves, that's when growth and change can happen. Bishop Sheen says, "No condition in the mind is worse than to forget the heavens from which we fall, for then we lose all aspirations for conversion." And this is one of the reasons why I told the judges, no, they need to be locked away forever because they will continue to hurt people. And I know as a Christian that sounds really harsh because we should have hope that everybody can change, but there's a cooperation that has to go along with this. And I never saw it. And I saw a lot of sexual offenders. I read a lot of cases. I dealt with a lot of these kinds of issues. And I just never saw it. And so I knew that it was such a great evil that it would be very difficult for these people to face themselves. And the fact that I couldn't even get victims to just face themselves, to deal with the negative coping strategies that they had used when it was very understandable. How are you going to get somebody who's done something as horrific as that to really face themselves? And so remember how at the beginning I told you to think about the person in your life who kind of fits this description. You just want to shake them by the shoulders and say, would you wake up? You are missing out on everything. And nothing ever seems to get through to them. Now I want us to think about ourselves. because we too have a problem facing our mirrors. Every single one of us has a problem facing mirrors. Not very many of us like criticism. Not very many of us want to, say out loud the bad things that we have done. And this is why the Sacrament of Confession is so vitally important. When I was Protestant, yes, there's the idea that, you need to ask for forgiveness for your sins. But when you don't have to go in front of somebody and say them, it's very easy to just, be in your room and say, "Oh, Jesus, please forgive me for my sins." You don't say them out loud. I mean, you might even say that out loud, but you don't name the sins. And this is why it was so hard for me on my first confession. I knew the evil that I had done after the worst night of my life. Sort of understandable, but I hated myself for it. I hated that was in me. And I had never really confronted myself about that. And so when I walked into that confessional for the very first time, and I knew I was going to have to say it out loud to the priest, really speaking to Christ, it was terrifying. And I just started sobbing and heaving as like it was just coming out of me. And it needed to happen. And I had to say it and to hear it. And that was devastating to my heart. I mean, I knew it in my mind, but it was devastating to my heart to say it out loud. And, so many of us are that way with confession. He says here, when remorse scourges us, the old ego becomes mad and even more violent than ever before. And that can happen to many of us. When we have some remorse about some sin that we have committed, we get mad. I don't have to go to confession. I don't have to confess my sins to a priest. I don't need to go. Nobody needs to know my business. This is the ego protecting itself. But we have to do that. We have to do it and get it out of us. And this is why, Christ instituting the Sacrament of Confession, He knows us. He knows us better than we know ourselves. And He knew that we needed to do this in order to face our mirror. That's what happens in confession. We face the mirror. We face what we have been capable of in a very negative way. And we have to ask for forgiveness for that. We have to say it out loud, and that's very difficult for us. And so, recently on my Facebook pages, I have been getting a lot of people who have just been livid with me about virtues. I have been talking a lot about virtues, especially chastity and modesty. And oh my gosh, those are the worst things ever to a large group of people. And I have had people just saying the worst and most vile things. And I think Bishop Sheen explains what's happening here. They are confronted with, virtue, but they have been living so long, rejecting it and doing bad things that they almost just spit at it. He says here at the top of page 109, this paralysis of conscience reaches its final stage in the mind when, as pure water becomes loathsome to the drunkard, so does justice and virtue to the depraved conscience. Then on the other page, he says, temper flares, hatred of others multiplies as a projection of a disguised hatred of self, and despondency seizes the soul from which no distraction gives relief. But all these violent outbursts against virtue are really nothing but the gathering of dark and angry clouds which one day will be dissolved in showers. He goes on to say, those who have to counsel other people should therefore never take too seriously the seeming wrath against goodness and morality. And, this is kind of what Christ placed on my heart in my prayer time when dealing with all these people being upset about virtues. He was saying to me, Amy, they're not really mad at virtue. They're not really mad at you. They are mad at themselves. And they are taking it out on you because you're speaking truth, and they know that you're right. But that means then that they have to confront the evil within themselves. And they don't want to. And so their tempers flare and they lash out and they call people horrible names. But don't take it personally. Don't take it too seriously, because you've caused an uncomfortableness within them, and they need that uncomfortableness within them because they haven't felt it for a very long time. And, that really comforted me and helped me. And, and I just prayed that maybe what I was saying might be planting seeds, that they might be thinking about what I said and wondering about it. I can only hope. And so the biggest thing that we have to understand is that we need the Sacrament of Confession. It is vital to the life of our soul. And it is actually where we will realize and recognize those parts of us that need to grow and change. So just to end it out and to leave it on a really good note, here's some lyrics from a song that I absolutely love that I think goes along with this. It's by the band 3 Doors Down. He says, "Tomorrow will be a brand new day, and I hope that it brings the chance that I forgot to take. And I know there's so much I can be if I can be strong enough to throw away these weak pieces of me." And we can only do that, Catholic pilgrims, if we are willing to face our mirror and look at ourselves. So that is all for this week. We'll leave it there. I will see you back here for week 31. And until then, live the faith boldly and travel well.